I asked my boyfriend about a one-sided open relationship, and he broke up with me. I'm 27 and my boyfriend is 41. We've been together 3 years, meeting when I started at his company. He was my supervisor, trained me my first 2 weeks. We hit it off immediately, so many common interests. Nothing happened initially, but after a month, I asked him for coffee. 6 months later, I moved in. That first year was incredible. Travel, restaurants, shows. He taught me about life, really listened, asked tough questions that changed my perspective. He taught me to stand up for myself. The more time together, the more I loved him. Then COVID hit. He's a workaholic. During lockdown, he worked 14 to 16-hour days. For 6 weeks straight, he worked 36 consecutive days. Come home, kiss me, work out, shower, sleep, repeat. I have to advocate for our team, he'd say. I was desperately lonely. When I told him, he tried, decorated our dining room like a Chinese restaurant, ordered takeout to simulate going out. Sweet, but I was still alone. An old college friend reached out on Facebook. We started texting. He gave me attention I craved, asked to meet for drinks. I said yes. Boyfriend wasn't home anyway. I drank too much. We kissed. It felt good. I gave him oral. No sex, but still. Next day, I asked my boyfriend to talk. I've been lonely. What are your thoughts on an open relationship? He listened as I explained. I loved him but needed attention he couldn't provide. This would be safe, easy. What brought this on? I mentioned my friend, how I wasn't interested in a relationship with him, just distraction. But it would be one-sided. I'm not comfortable sharing you with anyone. It's different for me, I'm alone more, need connection. You work constantly, have no time for other partners. He sat silent for minutes. Then I saw the hurt in his eyes. Ice water poured over me. I hadn't once thought about him. Before I could speak, you need to leave. Wait. I'm not emotionally able to communicate effectively. I need space. He left, asked me to be gone when he returned. 2 hours later, a text. We need time apart. We shouldn't be in a relationship right now. That was 2 days ago. I'm at my parents', can't eat or sleep. Then this morning, my phone rang. My coworker, Jolena. Did you see the email? What email? Check your work account. And company-wide announcement. My boyfriend had resigned, effective immediately. I called him. Voicemail, texted, nothing. Called his best friend, Marcus. Is he okay? You seriously asking that? I messed up, but you don't know, do you? Know what? Check his Instagram. His account was gone, but Marcus sent me screenshots from before deletion, a post from 3 weeks ago I'd never seen, planning something special for our anniversary. 3 years with the love of my life. Photos of a ring, custom designed, comments from his friends congratulating him. He was going to propose, Marcus said. Had the whole thing planned. Your favorite restaurant reopened for limited capacity. He booked it 2 months ago. This weekend. I couldn't breathe. There's more, Marcus continued. The open relationship thing? His ex-wife did the same thing. One-sided open relationship while he worked to support her through medical school. She ended up leaving him for one of her friends. Took him 3 years of therapy to trust again. Until you. I didn't know. The friend you mentioned, Jake Whitmore? How did you? He knew him. Jake's his ex-wife's husband now. My blood went cold. That's impossible. Jake reached out to him last month, bragging, sent him screenshots of your texts, your photos, told him history was repeating itself. Jake said he didn't know I had a boyfriend. He targeted you specifically. Found you through your boyfriend's social media. It was revenge for some work thing from years ago. Oh God. Your boyfriend didn't tell you because he thought you'd shut Jake down. Instead, you asked for permission to fuck him. It wasn't like that. I'm sending you something. Check your email. A video file. Security footage from our apartment building's garage. Dated last week, the night I met Jake. It showed me coming home at 2 a.m. But I told my boyfriend I'd been home by 10, asleep early. How did you? Your boyfriend knew. The building manager sent it to him the next morning. He was going to talk to you about it after the proposal, give you a chance to explain. Instead, you asked to sleep with other men while keeping him exclusive. I need to fix this. There's nothing to fix. He's already gone. Gone where? His company offered him a position in London. He took it. His flight left an hour ago. I hung up and drove to the airport. Ran to international departures. His flight to London. Departed. I called him again. This time it rang differently. international tone. Then a text came through. I loved you more than you'll ever know. The ring is in our apartment, top drawer. Keep it or sell it. I don't care anymore. I've blocked your number after this message. Don't contact me again. Be happy with Jake or whoever else. You won. I raced home. Found the ring box. Inside, a stunning vintage-inspired ring. Must have cost thousands. Under the ring, a note in his handwriting. 3 years ago, you changed my life. You helped me believe in love again after I thought I never would. Every day with you was a gift. I'm sorry I worked so much. I was trying to save enough so we could take a year off together after the wedding. Travel the world like you always dreamed. I guess I should have just told you instead of trying to surprise you. The house in Vermont is yours. Deed transfer is with my lawyer. It was going to be your wedding present. Be happy. You deserve more than I could give. The house in Vermont, the one I'd fallen in love with online, said was my dream home. He'd bought it. For me. My phone buzzed. Jake. Heard your boyfriend left. Want to grab that drink? I threw my phone across the room. Another buzz. Different phone. My work phone. Email from HR. Please report to Human Resources Monday at 9 a.m. regarding your relationship with a supervisor. Then another email. From an address I didn't recognize. You don't know me, but I'm your boyfriend's ex-wife. Marcus told me what happened. I need to tell you something about Jake. Meet me tomorrow. Urgent. I sit in my parents' living room staring at Jake's text message, my hands shaking so hard I nearly dropped my phone. The casual cruelty of, want to grab that drink? After destroying my entire life makes something shift inside me from devastation to cold rage. I screenshot the message and block his number. My first clear decision in 3 days. My thumb hovers over the delete button for a second before I save it to a folder labeled evidence that I create right there. I don't know what I'll need it for yet, but some part of me knows I'm going to need proof of what he's done. My parents are asleep upstairs and the house is quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I pull my laptop from my bag and open it on the coffee table, the blue light making my eyes hurt after 3 days of crying. Marcus's words keep playing in my head on repeat, about Jake targeting me specifically, about how this was all planned. I pull up Jake's Facebook profile and start scrolling back through years of posts, looking for any connection to my ex-boyfriend I might have missed. His profile is mostly public, full of gym selfies and political rants and check-ins at restaurants. I scroll past photos from last year, the year before, going back further and further. My stomach turns when I find a photo from 6 years ago tagged at my boyfriend's company holiday party. Jake's arm is around a woman I now recognize as the ex-wife, both of them smiling at the camera. The location tag says it's at some hotel ballroom downtown. I zoom in on the photo and see my ex-boyfriend in the background, younger but definitely him, talking to someone I don't recognize. Jake and the ex-wife look happy together, her hand resting on his chest. The comments are mostly generic holiday wishes, but one catches my eye from someone named Greg. Glad you two finally made it official. I click on the ex-wife's profile, but it's private now. Just a generic profile picture of a sunset. I go back to Jake's photos and keep scrolling, finding more pictures from that same time period. There's one of him and my ex-boyfriend standing together at what looks like a work site, both wearing hard hats. The caption says, last day before the big project launch, and it's dated 7 years ago. My chest tightens as I realize they weren't just co-workers. They worked closely together. I screenshot everything I find and save it to the same evidence folder. The email from the ex-wife sits in my inbox like a bomb I'm afraid to open. After 2 hours of staring at it, I finally click and read her message 3 times, trying to understand why she would want to meet with me. She says she has information about Jake that I need to know, that she made the same mistakes I did, and that she's been where I am now. Her email is short and direct, giving me her phone number and suggesting we meet Sunday morning at a coffee shop called Brewer's Corner on the east side of the city. She signs it just Rebecca with no last name. I type out a response saying I'll be there, my fingers moving automatically while my brain tries to process what's happening. I hit send before I can second-guess myself. I spend the entire night researching everything I can find about Jake Whitmore online. His LinkedIn shows he left my boyfriend's company 7 years ago after some kind of dispute, and there are hints in old forum posts about a project that went wrong. I find an article in a local business journal from 7 years ago about a construction project that was delayed due to safety concerns. The article doesn't name anyone specifically, but it mentions that several workers were reassigned and one supervisor was let go. I cross-reference the dates with Jake's LinkedIn and they match up perfectly. The more I dig, the more I realize this revenge plot has been years in the making. I find a Reddit thread from 6 years ago where someone with Jake's username is complaining about being fired unfairly, about how his boss threw him under the bus to save his own career. The details are vague, but the anger is clear. Comment after comment about how he's going to make things right someday. I screenshot that too. By the time the sun starts coming up, I have a folder full of evidence that Jake has been planning this for years. My eyes burn and my head pounds, but I can't stop looking. I find his ex-girlfriend's Instagram, a woman named Sarah who posted about their breakup 3 years ago. She hints at him being controlling and manipulative, about how he isolated her from her friends. I send her a message asking if she'd be willing to talk, knowing she probably won't respond but needing to try anyway. Sunday morning arrives and I still haven't slept, my eyes burning as I stare at my closet trying to figure out what to wear to an HR meeting that could end my career. My mom knocks softly and brings me coffee, not asking questions she knows I can't answer. The HR email said to report at 9 a.m. sharp, and I have exactly 4 hours to pull myself together enough to face professional consequences. I settle on black pants and a gray sweater, professional but not trying too hard. My reflection in the mirror looks terrible, dark circles under my eyes and my skin pale and blotchy from crying. I do my best with makeup, but there's only so much concealer can hide. My mom hugs me before I leave, holding on a little longer than usual. I meet Rebecca at Brewer's Corner, a coffee shop halfway across the city, somewhere neither of us would normally go. She's prettier than her photos, put together in a way that makes me feel even more like a disaster, but her eyes are kind when she sees me walk in. We sit in the back corner and she orders us both tea, her hands steady where mine are shaking. The shop is quiet on a Sunday morning, just a few people with laptops and newspapers scattered around. Rebecca looks like she's in her late 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail and minimal makeup. She's wearing jeans and a blue cardigan, casual but intentional. When our tea arrives, she wraps her hands around the mug and looks at me with an expression I can't quite read. She tells me her name is Rebecca Chandler, and that she kept her maiden name after marrying Jake, which should have been her first warning sign. She explains that Jake approached her 8 years ago when she was a medical student, stressed and lonely because her then-husband worked constantly. The parallels to my situation make my skin crawl. She describes how he started as just a friend from the gym, someone to talk to who seemed to understand her frustration. Her ex-husband was doing his residency at the time, working impossible hours just like my ex-boyfriend during COVID. Jake was attentive and available, always ready to listen when she needed to vent. Rebecca describes how Jake befriended her slowly, always there when her ex-husband wasn't, listening to her complaints and validating her feelings of neglect. She thought she was making her own choices when she started the affair, but looking back, she can see how deliberately he isolated her and amplified every small relationship problem. By the time she realized what was happening, she'd already left her husband, and Jake had what he wanted. She tells me about specific conversations where Jake would ask leading questions about her marriage, making her focus on everything that was wrong instead of what was right. He'd suggest meeting up right when her husband had to cancel plans, positioning himself as the reliable one. She says it took her 2 years after leaving her husband to see the pattern, to understand that Jake had been playing her the whole time. I ask Rebecca why Jake would do this, what her ex-husband did to deserve such calculated revenge. She pulls out her phone and shows me old emails between Jake and her ex-husband from their time working together, a project where her ex-husband reported Jake's safety violations that got him fired. Jake blamed him for ruining his career, even though Jake's own negligence caused the problems. The emails show my ex-boyfriend trying to address safety concerns professionally, giving Jake multiple chances to fix things before escalating to management. Jake's responses are defensive and angry, accusing my ex-boyfriend of having it out for him. The final email is from HR confirming Jake's termination, citing repeated safety violations and failure to comply with corrective action. Rebecca explains that she's been in therapy for 4 years working through what happened, and her therapist helped her see that while Jake manipulated the situation, she still made her own choices to betray someone who loved her. She says the hardest part was accepting both truths at once, that she was targeted and that she still had agency. She's telling me this now because she wishes someone had warned her before she destroyed her marriage. I pull out my phone and scroll back through my text history with Jake, watching Rebecca lean over to see the screen. Her finger taps on a message from 3 weeks ago, where Jake asked how things were going with my boyfriend, and she points out how he phrased it like he was just being friendly, but was actually fishing for information about our relationship problems. She shows me another message where Jake offered to listen if I ever needed to talk, positioning himself as the supportive friend right when I was feeling most alone. Rebecca scrolls further and stops on the message where Jake suggested meeting for drinks, sent the same day my boyfriend worked until midnight. She says the timing wasn't coincidence, that Jake probably knew my boyfriend's work schedule from watching our social media or asking mutual acquaintances. I feel sick looking at the pattern laid out in front of me, seeing how carefully Jake orchestrated every step. Rebecca tells me about a woman she met in her support group, who had a similar experience with Jake 2 years ago, another girlfriend of someone Jake had a grudge against. She says Jake used the same tactics with that woman too, the same sympathetic messages and convenient timing, and by the time the woman realized what was happening, her relationship was already destroyed. Rebecca's voice gets quiet when she says Jake is probably still doing this to people, using lonely women as weapons against men. He feels wronged him, and that I won't be the last unless someone stops him. I sit in my car after Rebecca drives away, staring at my mom's phone in my hands. My own phone is still blocked, but maybe if I use a different number he'll pick up. Maybe he'll give me one chance to explain everything I've learned about Jake's manipulation. I dial his number and listen to it ring once, twice, 3 times, my heart pounding so hard I can hear it in my ears. Then a recorded voice comes on, crisp and British, telling me this number is no longer accepting calls and to please try again later. I hang up and dial again, getting the same message, and the reality hits me that he didn't just block my number. He changed his number completely, erased even the possibility that I might find a way to reach him, and the finality of it makes my chest feel like it's caving in. I put my head down on the steering wheel and cry, ugly sobbing that makes my whole body shake, because there's no way to fix this now. He's gone and he made sure I can't follow. Sunday afternoon drags by in my parents' house while I systematically try every possible way to contact him. I send an email to his old work address and it bounces back immediately with an automated message saying the account no longer exists. His Instagram is completely deleted, not just deactivated, and when I search for his name, nothing comes up. I check LinkedIn and find his profile still exists, but he's already updated his location to London and his job title to his new position, like he's already settled into his new life across an ocean. I send Marcus 3 different messages begging him to just tell me if my ex is okay, if he's eating and sleeping, if he's as destroyed as I am. Marcus doesn't respond to any of them. I try Facebook and find that my ex has deactivated that account too, removing himself from every platform where I might reach him. The completeness of his departure feels deliberate and thorough, like he planned exactly how to cut every possible connection between us, and I have to sit with the knowledge that he meant what he said about not wanting contact. Losing him the first time was devastating, but watching him systematically erase every trace of our connection feels like losing him all over again. Only worse because now I understand exactly what I destroyed. Monday morning I wake up at 5:30 even though my alarm isn't set until 6, my stomach already churning with anxiety about the HR meeting. I arrive at the office at 8:30, a full 30 minutes before Liana told me to report, because I can't sit in my parents' house anymore waiting. The lobby is mostly empty this early, and I sit in one of the uncomfortable chairs near the elevators, my hands clenched together in my lap. Mateo from accounting comes through the lobby around 8:40 and does a visible double take when he sees me. He walks over and I must look as awful as I feel, because his face immediately softens with concern. He sits down next to me and squeezes my shoulder, leaning close to whisper that whatever is happening, I'll get through it. His kindness catches me off guard and I feel tears starting to well up, which would be humiliating before the meeting even begins. I blink them back and thank him, and he squeezes my shoulder once more before heading to the elevators. The simple gesture of someone being kind to me when I don't deserve it almost breaks me completely. Liana's office is on the 3rd floor in a windowless room that feels more like a closet than a proper office. She has a folder on her desk that looks thick with papers, and I know without asking that it contains documentation of my relationship with my ex. She gestures for me to sit in the chair across from her and opens the folder, her expression professional but not unkind. She explains that an anonymous complaint was filed about my relationship, alleging violations of company policy regarding supervisor and subordinate relationships. My face burns hot with shame as she asks me to confirm the timeline of when we started dating. I tell her we went on our first date about a month after I started working here, that I asked him out for coffee. She writes this down and asks when I was transferred out of his direct supervision. I tell her it was about 2 months after we started dating, that the transfer was arranged specifically because of our relationship. She nods and makes more notes, then asks me to describe the nature of our relationship and whether I ever felt pressured or coerced. The question makes me want to scream because the answer is the opposite, that I pursued him, that I pushed for more when he wanted to be careful about company policy. Liana slides a document across the desk, and I see it's the anonymous complaint form with the name redacted. The complaint was filed 2 weeks ago, right around the time Jake first reached out to me on Facebook. I read through the details and feel my hands start to shake because whoever filed this knew specific things about our relationship, private things like where we went on our first date, and what time I usually left his apartment in the mornings. The complaint alleges that my ex used his position as my supervisor to pressure me into a relationship, that the power dynamic was inappropriate from the start. My hands clench into fists under the table as I realize what Jake did. He didn't just manipulate me into betraying someone I loved, he also tried to destroy me professionally and paint my ex as some kind of predator who took advantage of a younger employee. The calculated cruelty of it makes me want to throw up right there in Liana's office. I interrupt Liana mid-question, my voice coming out sharper than I intended. I tell her I have information about who filed the complaint and why, and she looks surprised but gestures for me to continue. I explain about Jake Whitmore, about his connection to my ex through the ex-wife, about how he deliberately targeted me as part of a revenge plot over something that happened years ago at work. I pull out my phone and show her the screenshots Rebecca gave me, the old emails about the safety violations and Jake's termination. Then I show her my own text history with Jake, the way he slowly built up to suggesting we meet, the way he always messaged right when I was most vulnerable. Liana's expression shifts from professional skepticism to genuine concern as she reads through everything. She asks if she can take copies of the screenshots, and I nod, watching her scan each one into her computer. She tells me this changes the nature of the investigation significantly. Liana closes the folder and folds her hands on top of it. She says she needs to verify everything I've told her and consult with the company's legal team about how Jake's manipulation affects the policy violation investigation. But she also explains that even if I was deliberately targeted, the relationship still violated company policy since it began while my ex was my supervisor, before my transfer was arranged. The policy exists to prevent exactly this kind of situation, regardless of who pursued who or what the circumstances were. She tells me I could face consequences ranging from a written warning to termination, depending on what the legal team decides after reviewing all the evidence. I need to prepare myself for serious professional consequences, she says, and the room feels like it's tilting, and I grip the arms of the chair to steady myself. I make a split-second decision and tell Liana I want to provide a full statement about the relationship. I explain that it was completely consensual, that I pursued him initially and asked him out first, that he was actually hesitant because of the policy and his position as my supervisor. I tell her about how he arranged my transfer as soon as we started dating, how he was always careful about maintaining professional boundaries at work. If I'm going down for this, I'm not going to let Jake's complaint paint my ex as some predatory supervisor who took advantage of a naive younger employee. Liana looks at me with something that might be respect and says she appreciates my honesty. She'll schedule a follow-up meeting for later this week once legal has reviewed everything and made their determination. I stand up on shaky legs and leave her office, knowing my career here might be over, but at least I didn't let Jake destroy my ex's reputation along with everything else. I leave the building and get in my car, but instead of driving back to my parents' house, I head toward the apartment I shared with my ex. I use my key knowing this will probably be one of the last times, that eventually the lease will end, or he'll have someone come pack up the rest of his things and change the locks. I need to face the physical reality of the life I destroyed, even though every item I touch is going to feel like a knife in my chest. The parking garage is dim and quiet at 9:30 on a Monday morning, most people already at work. I take the elevator up to our floor and walk down the hallway that used to feel like coming home. The apartment is eerily quiet when I open the door, already feeling abandoned like a museum of our relationship. Most of his personal items are gone and the space feels hollow without them. I walk through each room like a ghost, visiting her own life. The couch where we watched movies every Sunday still has the indent from where he always sat. The coffee table holds a water ring from my mug, but none from his because he always used a coaster. I open the kitchen cabinets and find them half empty, his favorite mugs gone, the fancy espresso machine he bought last year missing from the counter. He took the things that mattered to him and left behind the shared items we picked out together, like he wanted to erase himself but not punish me by taking everything. The bedroom is worse. His side of the closet gapes empty, hangers pushed to one end in a sad cluster. I run my fingers along the empty rod and find dust where his suits used to hang. The nightstand on his side is cleared off completely. No books or reading glasses or the small dish where he emptied his pockets every night. I sink onto the bed and the mattress feels too big now, too cold, like it knows he's never coming back. I force myself to stand and start opening drawers, looking for anything he might have left behind. His dresser is empty except for some old t-shirts he must have forgotten. The bathroom cabinet under the sink where he kept his shaving supplies is bare. I'm about to give up when I see a small box pushed to the back of the top shelf in the bedroom closet, behind where his winter coats used to be. I have to drag the desk chair over to reach it. The box is plain cardboard, unmarked, and when I lift it down, it's lighter than I expected. Inside I find a stack of papers, some photos, and an envelope with my name written on the front in his careful handwriting. My hands shake so badly I almost drop the envelope. The date on it says 3 weeks ago, back when everything was still good, back when he was planning to propose. I sit down on the closet floor because my legs won't hold me anymore, and I tear open the envelope with shaking fingers. The letter inside is 3 pages long, front and back. His handwriting neat and precise like always. I start reading, and the first line punches the air from my lungs. He wrote that he loved me more than he'd ever loved anyone, that I brought light back into his life after years of darkness. He said he knew his work habits were hurting us, and he was sorry for all the nights he came home too tired to really be present. He explained that he'd been working so hard because he wanted to save enough money for us to take 6 months off together after the wedding. He'd already talked to his boss about a sabbatical, and they'd approved it, contingent on him finishing the current project. He wanted to travel with me to all the places I'd talked about visiting. Wanted to spend half a year just focusing on us without work stress or money worries. Requested Reads is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. He wrote about the Vermont house and how he'd been planning to tell me about it the night he proposed. How he imagined us spending long weekends there in the fall watching the leaves change. He described plans for a garden I could tend and a studio space where I could finally try painting like I'd always wanted. He said he'd been building our future brick by brick, while I thought he was just ignoring me. Every sentence is a reminder of how badly I misunderstood everything. How I destroyed something precious because I couldn't just talk to him about feeling lonely. The second page gets harder to read through my tears. He wrote about his ex-wife and how her betrayal nearly broke him, how it took 3 years of therapy before he could even consider dating again. He said meeting me felt like a miracle, like life was giving him a second chance to get it right. He wrote that he never told me about his ex-wife's affair because he didn't want to burden me with his past pain and because he trusted me completely. He said that trust was the most valuable thing he'd ever given anyone, and I was the only person since his divorce who he'd felt safe enough to offer it to. Reading those words knowing what I did makes me want to throw up. He trusted me, and I proved I wasn't worthy of it. He loved me, and I threw it away for attention from someone who was using me as a weapon. The last page is the worst. He wrote that he hoped I would understand why he worked so hard, that he was trying to build financial security, so we could have freedom together. He said he was planning to tell me everything the night he proposed, to show me that he'd heard my concerns even when I didn't voice them directly. He wanted to prove through actions that he was committed to making our relationship the priority, that the long hours were temporary and leading somewhere better. He wrote that he knew he wasn't perfect, but he was trying his best to be the partner I deserved. The letter ends with him saying he couldn't wait to see my face when he got down on one knee, that he'd been carrying the ring around for 2 weeks already because he was too excited to leave it at home. I fold the letter carefully with shaking hands and put it in my purse. It's evidence of what I lost, proof that the future I destroyed was even better than I knew. My phone buzzes in my pocket and I jump. It's a text from a number I don't recognize. The message makes my stomach turn. Jake asking if we can talk, like he has any right to contact me after what he did. I should block the number immediately, but something stops me. If he wants to gloat or manipulate me further, I'm going to make sure he faces consequences for it. I text back suggesting we meet at the public park near my parents' house tomorrow morning. Somewhere public where I'll be safe and where I can record every word he says. He responds within seconds, agreeing to 10 a.m. I screenshot the entire conversation and email it to myself as backup. I spend the rest of Monday night at my parents' house preparing for the meeting with Jake. I charge my phone fully and test the voice recorder app 3 times to make sure it's working. I write out a list of questions I want to ask him and things I need him to admit on tape. My mom knocks on my door around 11 to ask if I'm okay, and I tell her I'm fine even though I'm not. She doesn't push, but I can see the worry in her eyes. I barely sleep that night, running through scenarios in my head about what Jake might say and how I'll respond. By the time my alarm goes off Tuesday morning, I feel sick with nerves and anger. I arrive at the park 15 minutes early and sit on a bench near the playground where there are other people around. I start the recording app on my phone and put it in my jacket pocket with the microphone facing out. At exactly 10 a.m., Jake walks up looking pleased with himself, like this is all some game he's winning. He's wearing expensive sunglasses and a leather jacket that probably cost more than my rent. He sits down next to me without asking and starts with fake concern about how I'm doing. I cut him off before he can finish his act. I tell him I know everything about his history with my ex-boyfriend, about Rebecca, about the HR complaint he filed. I watch his face change as he realizes I'm not the easy target he thought I was. The pleased expression drops away, and something colder slides into place. Jake leans back against the bench and crosses his arms. He admits he reached out to me specifically because of who I was dating. He says my ex-boyfriend ruined his career over a minor safety issue and deserved to feel the same betrayal Jake felt when he got fired. His voice is casual, like he's discussing the weather, instead of confessing to deliberately destroying my relationship. I dig my nails into my palms to keep from screaming at him. He keeps talking and says that my ex-boyfriend reported violations to cover up his own mistakes on that project years ago, that he scapegoated Jake to protect himself. Then Jake says something that stops me cold. He says I still made every choice myself, that he just provided opportunity, and I took it. He's right, and I hate him for it. I wanted someone to blame besides myself, but Jake won't let me off that easy. Jake pulls out his phone and shows me documents from 7 years ago. Emails and project reports that suggest my ex-boyfriend knew about problems on the construction site before Jake's violations. The documentation looks official with company letterhead and signatures. Jake claims my ex-boyfriend saw the issues coming and reported Jake's smaller infractions to deflect attention from his own oversight failures. He says 3 people lost their jobs over that project, but my ex-boyfriend got promoted because he positioned himself as the one who caught the problems. I don't know what to believe anymore. The clear moral lines I wanted where Jake is the villain and my ex-boyfriend is the victim blur into something complicated and painful. Maybe my ex-boyfriend wasn't perfect. Maybe Jake's grievance had some basis, even if his revenge was wrong. Maybe everyone involved made mistakes and I'm just another casualty in a war that started before I even met either of them. Jake stands up to leave and tells me I should thank him for showing me who my ex-boyfriend really was. I stay silent because anything I say will just feed his ego. He walks away across the park and I sit there for another 20 minutes making sure the recording saved properly. I have his confession on tape, but I don't know what to do with it. Reporting him to his current employer feels petty and won't undo what happened. Sharing it with my ex-boyfriend is impossible since he blocked me. The recording is evidence, but evidence of what exactly? That Jake manipulated me and I let him? That my ex-boyfriend might have made mistakes years ago that don't justify what happened to us? I save the file to 3 different places and head back to my parents' house feeling hollowed out. That evening, my phone rings and it's Rebecca. I answer, and she asks how I'm doing in that gentle way that makes me want to cry. I tell her about confronting Jake and what he said about my ex-husband. Rebecca listens without interrupting and then says she struggled with the same thing. She learned her ex-husband wasn't perfect and that Jake's grievance had some legitimate basis, even though his revenge was wrong. She reminds me that people can be flawed and still not deserve what Jake did to them. She says her ex-husband made mistakes at work years ago, but that didn't justify Jake targeting her to hurt him. She tells me my ex-boyfriend's past doesn't erase what he built with me or excuse my betrayal. Her words help a little, but they also make everything feel more complicated. I wanted simple answers about who was right and who was wrong, but real life doesn't work that way. After we hang up, I search online for therapists who specialize in relationship trauma and manipulation. Rebecca mentioned someone named Penelope Staley, who helped her work through everything after her divorce from Jake. I find her website and send an inquiry through the contact form, explaining my situation in vague terms. She responds within an hour with available appointment times. The first slot she has is Friday afternoon, 3 days away. I book it immediately, even though the cost makes me wince. I need professional help processing everything that happened because I clearly can't figure this out on my own. The next 3 days drag by in a fog at my parents' house. I can't eat more than a few bites at meals, and I'm sleeping maybe 3 hours a night. My mom tries to help by making my favorite foods and offering to watch movies with me, but nothing helps. My dad looks at me with disappointed concern that reminds me of being 16 and getting caught sneaking out. They don't know what to say, and I don't know how to explain the mess I've made. I spend hours lying in my childhood bedroom staring at the ceiling and replaying every moment with my ex-boyfriend, looking for signs I missed that things were falling apart, but there weren't signs because things weren't falling apart until I broke them myself. Friday morning arrives and I book my first therapy appointment with Penelope Staley for that afternoon. The 3 days between now and then feel impossible to fill, so I spend most of Thursday cleaning out my stuff from the apartment. I pack my clothes into garbage bags and load them into my car trip after trip until my childhood bedroom at my parents' house looks like a storage unit. Each item I touch reminds me of something we did together or somewhere we went. I find his old college sweatshirt that I used to wear around the apartment, and I hold it against my face, breathing in the faint smell of his cologne before stuffing it in a bag. My mom watches me carry load after load inside but doesn't ask questions. She just makes sandwiches I don't eat and refills my water glass when I forget to drink. Thursday afternoon, Liana emails me asking me to come in for the follow-up meeting at 2 o'clock. I shower for the first time in 2 days and put on work clothes that hang loose because I've barely eaten all week. My hands shake while I'm doing my makeup and I have to redo my eyeliner 3 times. The drive to the office feels surreal, like I'm watching myself from outside my body. I park in the garage where that security footage was taken, and I can picture myself stumbling and drunk at 2 a.m, thinking I'd gotten away with something. The building manager must have sent that video to my ex-boyfriend the next day, and he spent weeks knowing I'd lied to him while planning to propose anyway. The thought makes me want to throw up right there in the parking garage. Liana's office looks the same as it did Monday, but somehow more official now that she has actual decisions to tell me. She gestures for me to sit, and I notice there's a much thicker folder on her desk this time. She opens it and pulls out several printed pages that look like email chains and investigation notes. Her expression is professional but not unkind as she starts explaining what the company decided. They investigated Jake's complaint thoroughly, and also looked into my counter evidence about his manipulation and the revenge plot against my ex-boyfriend. The legal team determined that while Jake's actions were concerning and potentially malicious, that doesn't change the fact that my relationship with my ex-boyfriend violated company policy about supervisor-subordinate relationships. I nod because I knew this was coming, but hearing it out loud still feels like a punch to the stomach. Liana continues talking, and I focus on her words instead of the panic rising in my chest. The relationship became consensual after the initial training period, and I was transferred out of his direct supervision relatively quickly, which works in my favor. Because of those factors, and because my ex-boyfriend is no longer with the company, they've decided to issue a formal written warning instead of termination. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. The warning will stay in my personnel file for 2 years, and any future policy violations will result in immediate termination without exception. She slides a document across the desk for me to sign, acknowledging that I understand the terms. My hand shakes as I pick up the pen, but I sign it anyway because fair is fair, and I did violate policy even if I didn't mean to hurt anyone. Then Liana tells me about the transfer. I'm being moved to a different department effective immediately starting next Monday. The new position is in operations instead of my current role, and it comes with a small pay cut because it's technically a lateral move to a different job classification. I'll be working with a completely different team and reporting to a new supervisor who's been briefed on the situation in general terms without specific details. The humiliation of knowing people will talk about why I got transferred makes my face burn hot. Liana must see my expression because she adds that the company takes employee privacy seriously, and only essential personnel know the details of what happened. Most people will just think I wanted a change, or that there was a departmental reorganization. I thank her even though we both know people will gossip regardless of what the official story is. Before I leave, Liana mentions that the company is also investigating Jake for filing what appears to be a malicious complaint. She pulls out another document showing that they contacted his current employer about his harassment of me and his attempt to damage my career through false or exaggerated claims. I feel a small spark of satisfaction hearing that he's facing some consequences. But then Liana warns me not to expect too much because Jake doesn't work here anymore, and the company's ability to punish him is limited. The most they can do is ban him from company property and flag his file if he ever tries to apply here again. His current employer might take action, but that's out of their control. She suggests I might want to consider getting a restraining order if Jake continues trying to contact me, and she hands me a business card for the company's legal resources department. I take the card and thank her again before leaving her office. At least I still have a job, even if my reputation at this company is probably damaged forever. I drive straight from the office to Penelope's practice, which is in a small professional building near the downtown area. Her waiting room has comfortable chairs and peaceful artwork on the walls, but I'm too nervous to appreciate any of it. I fill out intake paperwork asking about my medical history and current symptoms. Depression, anxiety, insomnia, loss of appetite, difficulty concentrating. I check almost every box. A door opens, and a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair calls my name. I follow her into her office, which has a couch and 2 armchairs arranged around a small table. She gestures for me to sit wherever I'm comfortable, and I choose the couch because it feels less formal than the chairs. Penelope introduces herself and explains how therapy works, confidentiality rules, and what I can expect from our sessions. Then she asks me to tell her what brought me here today. I open my mouth to start explaining and immediately start crying. She hands me a tissue box and waits patiently while I try to pull myself together. I start from the beginning with how I met my ex-boyfriend and our 3-year relationship, and how lonely I felt during COVID. The words pour out in a jumbled mess, and I have to stop twice more to cry when I get to the part about asking for an open relationship and learning about the proposal. Penelope listens without interrupting, and her face stays neutral without judgment, but also without letting me off the hook. When I get to the part about Jake, she asks specific questions about how he approached me and what he said. I show her some of the text messages I saved before blocking him, and she reads them carefully. She points out patterns in his messages that I didn't notice before, the way he asked leading questions and offered sympathy at exactly the right moments. But then she says something that stops me cold. She tells me that while Jake clearly manipulated the situation, I still made my own choices within that manipulation. I had agency even if I didn't see all the factors influencing my decisions. We're going to work on understanding both things at once, the manipulation I experienced and the choices I made. It's not about blame, she says. It's about understanding so I can make different choices in the future. The session lasts 50 minutes, and by the end, I'm exhausted, but also somehow lighter. Penelope gives me some homework to think about my relationship patterns and what I was really seeking when I responded to Jake's attention. She asked me to notice over the next week when I'm looking for validation from external sources versus finding it internally. We schedule another appointment for the following week, and I leave her office feeling like maybe I can survive this after all. The weekend drags by in a blur of sleeping too much and staring at my phone hoping for messages that won't come. My ex-boyfriend's number is still blocked and his social media is still deleted. I check Marcus's Instagram to see if there are any clues about how my ex is doing, but Marcus hasn't posted anything since before everything happened. Sunday night, I can't sleep thinking about starting my new job assignment tomorrow and facing coworkers who probably heard rumors about why I got transferred. 2 weeks pass in a strange new routine. I go to my new job in operations where everyone is polite but distant. Mateo Hampton works in my new department, and on my first day, he takes me to lunch at the sandwich place across the street. We sit at a corner table, and he asks if I'm okay without pushing for details he knows I can't share. I tell him I'm working on it, and he nods like, that's a good enough answer. He talks about normal things like the new project the department is starting and which managers are reasonable versus difficult. His friendship feels like a small bright spot in all the darkness. We start having lunch together once or twice a week, and I'm grateful he doesn't treat me like I'm damaged or gossip about what happened. I see Penelope twice a week and slowly start unpacking my relationship patterns. She asks me about my previous relationships before my ex-boyfriend and I realize I've always sought validation from partners rather than building my own sense of worth. When my ex worked long hours and couldn't give me attention, I felt worthless, like I didn't matter. Jake's attention felt like proof that I was valuable and desirable. Penelope says this is something we'll work on long-term, learning to validate myself instead of depending on external sources. She gives me exercises to practice, like writing down things I accomplished each day that have nothing to do with other people's opinions. It feels stupid at first, but I do it anyway because I don't know what else to do. One night, 2 weeks after the breakup, I sit down at my parents' kitchen table and write a long letter to my ex-boyfriend. I know I'll never send it, but Penelope suggested writing it anyway as part of processing everything. I start by taking full responsibility for my betrayal without making excuses or blaming Jake's manipulation. I explain what I learned about how Jake targeted me, but I'm careful not to use that as a way to absolve myself of what I did. I tell him about starting therapy and the work I'm doing to understand my patterns. I write that I understand why he left and that I respect his boundaries completely. I write that I'm sorry for destroying something beautiful because I didn't know how to communicate my needs like an adult. The letter ends up being 4 pages long, and by the time I finish, my face is wet with tears. I fold it carefully and put it in an envelope with his name on it that I'll never mail. At my second therapy session with Penelope, I bring the letter and read it out loud. My voice shakes the whole time, and I have to stop several times to compose myself. When I finish, Penelope is quiet for a moment before asking me what I hope to gain from sending it. I'm honest, and tell her that part of me wants him to forgive me and come back. She nods like she expected that answer, and then gently points out that I'm still seeking external validation instead of doing the internal work. She suggests I keep the letter as a reminder of what I've learned, but focus on healing for my own sake, not to win him back. The distinction feels important even though it hurts to hear. I'm not healing to get him back. I'm healing because I need to become a better person regardless of whether he ever knows about it. Monday morning, I start my new assignment in operations officially. The office is on a different floor from where I used to work, and I don't run into anyone from my old department. My new supervisor is a woman named Carol who's professional but warm. She shows me my desk and introduces me to the team. Mateo stops by mid-morning to see how I'm settling in and offers to grab coffee. We go to the break room and he asks how I'm really doing. I tell him I'm working on it, which is becoming my standard answer. He says that's all anyone can do, just work on it one day at a time. His friendship continues to feel like a lifeline in all this mess. 3 weeks after the breakup, Liana calls my work extension. My stomach drops thinking something else has gone wrong, but her tone is professional and almost pleased. She tells me the company has officially banned Jake from all company property after confirming he filed a malicious complaint against me. They also reported his harassment to his current employer, though she doesn't know what action they'll take. It's not enough consequence for what he did to me and my ex-boyfriend, but it's something. I feel a grim satisfaction knowing he didn't get away with it completely, even if the damage is already done. That afternoon, Rebecca texts me asking if I want to meet for coffee again. We meet at the same place as our first meeting, and this time the conversation feels different. Less about Jake's manipulation and more about how we're both healing from what happened. Rebecca tells me she's been divorced from Jake for 2 years now, and she's dating someone new who treats her with respect. She says it took a long time to trust again after everything, but therapy helped her understand her patterns and make better choices. I ask her what made her ready to date again, and she says there wasn't one moment, just gradual healing until she felt strong enough to risk being vulnerable again. She tells me about her new boyfriend and how different the relationship feels when it's built on mutual respect instead of manipulation and codependency. I ask Rebecca if she ever got closure with her ex-husband. She puts down her tea and shakes her head slowly. He refused all contact just like mine did. Blocked her number, moved cities, made it clear he wanted nothing to do with her. She says she spent 2 years hoping he'd eventually respond to one of her letters or emails, That time would soften his anger enough for a conversation. It never happened. She had to make peace with never getting his forgiveness. Learning to forgive herself instead became the only path forward. It's not the answer I wanted. Some part of me still hoped she'd tell me her ex-husband came around after enough time passed, that maybe mine would too. But she's being honest with me, and I appreciate her not giving me false hope just to make me feel better. She says the hardest part was accepting that some doors close permanently, that some damage can't be undone no matter how much you wish otherwise. I thank her for meeting with me again, and we hug before leaving the coffee shop. The drive home feels heavier than usual. A month after the breakup, my mom brings me a certified letter that arrived at their house. The return address shows a law firm downtown. My hands shake as I sign for it. Inside is a thick stack of paperwork regarding the Vermont house. For one stupid second, my heart stops, and I think maybe he wants to talk, that this is him reaching out through his lawyer. But it's just legal documents transferring the deed to my name. A note from the lawyer explains my ex-boyfriend wants to finalize all property matters. There's no personal message from him, just business. Cold, formal, impersonal. The lawyer's note says I need to sign the enclosed forms and return them within 30 days to complete the transfer. That's it. No mention of him at all, just instructions about notarizing signatures and filing procedures. The impersonal nature of it hurts almost as much as the initial breakup. He's treating me like a stranger he needs to settle accounts with, not someone he loved for 3 years. I set the papers on my desk and stare at them for an hour before I can bring myself to actually read through the legal language. I bring the Vermont house paperwork to my next therapy session with Penelope. She asks me what I want to do with it. The house is worth at least $400,000, according to the property assessment included in the documents. A gift I don't deserve and didn't earn. I tell her I feel guilty accepting it, like I'm profiting from my betrayal. Taking something this valuable after what I did feels wrong. But I also don't know if refusing it would just be performative guilt, rather than genuine healing. Would sending the papers back unsigned actually help me grow as a person, or would it just be a dramatic gesture? Penelope asks me what I think my ex-boyfriend wants. I admit I have no idea anymore. She suggests that maybe he wants to close this chapter completely, to remove every connection between us so he can move forward. The house was meant for a future we're not having. Keeping it ties him to me in a way he clearly doesn't want. She asks me to think about what would actually serve my healing, not what would make me feel less guilty in the moment. Over the next few sessions, Penelope helps me understand that my ex-boyfriend giving me the house isn't about me deserving it. It's about him closing that chapter of his life completely. He bought it for someone he thought I was, for a future he was planning. That future doesn't exist anymore. Keeping it or selling it won't change what happened between us. She helps me see that I need to make the choice based on what will actually help me move forward, not based on guilt or shame. After several sessions of discussion, I decide to sell the house. I can't live there knowing what it represents. The money will go toward paying for therapy long-term, paying back my parents for supporting me these past weeks, and starting to build a life that's genuinely mine. Not the life he was trying to give me. Not the life I thought I wanted when I was with him. Something new that comes from understanding who I actually am. I sign the deed transfer papers and mail them back to the lawyer. Then I contact a real estate agent in Vermont about listing the property. 6 weeks after the breakup, I'm settling into a new routine. Therapy twice a week with Penelope, where we dig into my patterns around seeking validation and making decisions from loneliness rather than genuine desire. My new job in operations keeps me busy, and Mateo has become a good friend who takes me to lunch twice a week without asking uncomfortable questions. Regular coffee meetings with Rebecca, who's become an unexpected friend, someone who understands what I'm going through in a way nobody else can. I'm slowly rebuilding my sense of self, separate from my ex-boyfriend, separate from who I was trying to be for him. I still think about him every day, probably will for a long time. Wonder if he's happy in London, if he's met someone new, if he ever thinks about me. But I'm learning to sit with the grief and guilt without letting it consume me completely. The real estate agent in Vermont called yesterday. She says the house should sell quickly given the location and condition. There's already interest from 3 potential buyers. I'm ready to let go of that dream and build new ones based on who I actually am, rather than who I wanted to be. Well, that's another emotional disaster beautifully narrated by yours truly. If you made it to the end, I don't know if I should be proud or worried. Either way, subscribe. Misery loves company. I accused my boyfriend of cheating, and now I deeply regret my actions. We had been dating for almost a year when we moved into a small house near his hometown. Everything felt perfect until he mentioned a yearly tradition. Every year on the same date, he flies to California for a few days. When I asked why, he got quiet and changed the subject by inviting me to come along. I had to work that week, so I said no. I knew he was a former Marine and had been stationed out there, so I figured it was just to visit old buddies or relive some memories. I didn't push it. Then something happened that made me spiral. A few days later, he was cooking dinner and left his phone charging in the living room where I was sitting. A text popped up from a name I didn't recognize. The screen was locked, but I'm ashamed to admit I had figured out his password weeks ago. It was the name of his favorite gun. Predictable. I know I shouldn't have looked, but I've been cheated on before. I trusted my ex with everything, and he destroyed me. So when I saw that text, my old wounds took over. The message said, "Don't forget, Maya's favorite beer is Buzz Light. Grab a few cases." My heart dropped. Who was Maya? Why was he buying her favorite beer for a trip he wouldn't explain to me? I closed the phone and pretended I saw nothing, but inside I was falling apart. I went to my work friends for advice, and all three of them said the same thing. He's taking another woman on a romantic getaway. He's cheating. My anxiety exploded. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how I believed he was the one, and how could he betray me like this? I decided I wasn't going to cry alone. I was going to confront him and catch him in his lies. I came home early that day. He was in the backyard fixing a broken fence post. I called out and told him to come inside. He said he'd be there in a second. I told him to come now. I heard him drop everything and run in. He probably thought I was hurt because when he saw my face, he immediately asked what was wrong. I looked him straight in the eyes and said, "I know you're cheating on me." He froze. Then he actually laughed a little, like I was joking. When he saw my tears, his smile disappeared. He stepped toward me, trying to hold me, but I pushed him away. He looked so confused and hurt. He stepped back and quietly asked, "What made you think I'm cheating?" I told him I knew about Maya. I said I knew he was flying out to see her next week. He nodded slowly and said, "Yeah, I am." I broke. He just admitted it. I started sobbing harder, barely able to breathe. But then he reached into his wallet and pulled out an old photograph. He handed it to me and said, "That's Maya." The photo showed two Marines in full gear, arms around each other's shoulders, rifles in their free hands. One of them was my boyfriend, younger but unmistakable. The other was a woman. She had a wide smile and kind eyes. I had seen this picture before in a memorial post his friend shared online. Maya had taken her own life 3 years ago while they were deployed together. My boyfriend sat down across from me and explained everything. Every year on the anniversary of her death, he flies to California where her family lives. He visits her grave. He has dinner with her parents. He brings her favorite beer and they share stories about her. It's how they all cope. It's how they remember her. I felt like the worst person in the world. I had taken his grief and turned it into something ugly. I accused him of betrayal when he was honoring someone he lost. I started apologizing over and over, but he just sat there quietly for a long time. Then he looked at me and said, "I should have told you. I just don't like talking about it. It still hurts." He wasn't angry. He was sad, and that made it worse. We talked for hours that night. He told me about Maya, about the guilt he still carries, about how hard it is to open up. I told him about my past, about the men who broke my trust, about why I assumed the worst. We both cried. We both apologized. And somewhere in that mess, we got closer than we had ever been. He still went to California the following week, but this time I asked if I could come. He said yes. I met Maya's parents. I visited her grave. I watched my boyfriend cry in a way I had never seen before. And I finally understood what he carries with him every single day. I almost destroyed the best relationship I've ever had because I let my past control me. I assumed betrayal because that's all I had ever known. But he showed me that some people are exactly who they say they are. Some silences aren't hiding lies. They're protecting wounds that haven't fully healed. I'm sharing this because I know I'm not the only one who has let old pain poison something good. If your partner has a part of themselves they don't share easily, maybe give them time instead of suspicion. I almost lost everything by assuming the worst. I'm just grateful he gave me the chance to understand the truth. I spent the next week with my laptop open constantly, reading everything I could find about survivors' guilt and military PTSD. The articles explained how service members carry invisible wounds that don't show up on any medical scan, but affect everything they do. I read about combat trauma and what happens when someone watches their friends die, how the brain tries to process something it was never meant to handle. One article talked about how veterans often can't explain their experiences to civilians because the words don't exist for what they went through. That helped me understand why my boyfriend couldn't just mention Maya over dinner like she was some old friend from work. She wasn't a casual topic. She was a wound that never fully closed. My phone rang on Wednesday afternoon while I was reading about anniversary reactions in PTSD. Miranda's name flashed on the screen. I answered, and she asked how I was doing, her voice careful like she was checking on someone who might break. I told her everything. The accusation, the photograph, the truth about Maya, the hours of crying and talking that followed. She listened without interrupting, which isn't like her at all. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said she was proud of me for admitting I was wrong and apologizing. But she also reminded me that my trust issues are real problems I need to deal with properly. She said understanding where they come from doesn't mean I get a pass for snooping through his phone or jumping to conclusions. She was right, and it stung to hear it. At work the next day, I pulled Juliana aside during lunch break. She was the one who'd been most convinced he was cheating, the one who said all the signs pointed to another woman. I told her the real story about Maya and the annual trip to visit her grave. Juliana's face went red and she looked genuinely embarrassed. She apologized for jumping to conclusions and admitted she'd been projecting her own cheating ex onto my situation. Her ex had used similar excuses about trips and old friends, so she assumed mine was doing the same thing. We both realized we'd let our past experiences cloud what was actually happening. She hugged me and said she was glad she was wrong, that my boyfriend sounded like one of the good ones. That evening, my boyfriend came home from work and found me on the couch with my laptop, reading another article about military grief. He set down his keys and asked what I was doing. I told him honestly that I was trying to understand what he'd been through, that I wanted to know more about what he carries every day. His expression softened and he sat down next to me. He seemed touched that I was making the effort, but then he warned me that reading about it isn't the same as witnessing it. He said the articles can explain the psychology and the symptoms, but they can't show me what it actually feels like to lose someone that way. I nodded and told him I knew that, but I wanted to try anyway. 3 days before we were supposed to leave for California, he pulled out his phone after dinner. He scrolled through his photos for a minute, then turned the screen toward me. Maya was goofing around on base in one picture, making a silly face at the camera. In another, she was at a barbecue with other Marines, holding a plate piled high with food. There was one of her cleaning her rifle, focused and serious. His voice stayed steady as he swiped through the images, but I watched his jaw muscles tighten with each photo. I realized he probably didn't look at these very often, that showing them to me was difficult for him. I asked if I could see more, and he kept scrolling, sharing little details about where each photo was taken or what they'd been doing that day. I asked him what Maya was like as a person, not just as a Marine. He smiled a little and told me she was funny, that she could do perfect impressions of their commanding officers that had everyone cracking up. He said she was always pulling pranks on the newer guys, nothing mean but enough to keep things interesting when deployment got boring. Then he mentioned her terrible singing voice, how she'd belt out country songs in the shower and everyone could hear her through the whole barracks. As he talked, I could see glimpses of the friendship they'd had before everything went dark. These weren't just war stories or trauma memories. These were real moments with a real person he'd cared about. The night before our flight, we were packing our bags when he stopped and sat down on the edge of the bed. He admitted he was nervous about me meeting Maya's parents. He said they're the only people who really understand what he lost, who knew Maya the way he did. I promised to be respectful and follow his lead, that I understood I was entering sacred space in their shared grief. He nodded and went back to packing, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. This trip wasn't just emotionally hard for him, it was also the first time he was bringing someone into this part of his life, and that carried its own kind of pressure. On the plane to California, he barely said a word. He stared out the window for most of the flight, watching the clouds pass below us. His knee bounced constantly, a nervous habit I'd noticed before but never this intense. I held his hand and didn't try to force conversation. I was learning that sometimes support doesn't mean filling the silence with words. Sometimes it just means being there, being present while someone works through whatever they're feeling. The flight attendant came by twice to offer drinks and snacks. We both declined. Neither of us had much appetite. When we landed and picked up our rental car, his whole demeanor changed. His shoulders tensed up and pulled back like he was bracing for something. His responses got shorter, just 1 or 2 words instead of full sentences. I realized he was already mentally preparing himself for the emotional weight of the next few days. The drive from the airport into the city felt longer than it probably was. He gripped the steering wheel tight and kept his eyes fixed on the road. I didn't try to make small talk or point out landmarks. I just let him have the space to get ready for what was coming. We stopped at a liquor store about 20 minutes from Maya's parents' house. He pulled into the parking lot and turned off the engine. Inside, he walked straight to the beer section without hesitation. He grabbed 3 cases of Buzz Light, stacking them in his arms like he'd done this exact thing many times before. I stood there watching him and finally understood the text message that had started my whole spiral of suspicion. This wasn't some secret romantic gesture for another woman. This was a tradition, a way of including Maya in a gathering she should have been part of. He clearly knew exactly what her parents expected him to bring each year, down to the specific brand and quantity. At the checkout counter, he paid in cash while I stood beside him holding my purse and feeling like I was watching someone else's life unfold in front of me. The cashier asked if we were having a party, and my boyfriend just said something about visiting family, his voice flat and distant. We loaded the beer into the trunk and got back in the car without speaking. The drive to Maya's parents' house took us through neighborhoods that looked like any other California suburb, houses with neat lawns and two-car garages, completely normal except for the fact that we were heading toward a place where grief lived permanently in every room. He pointed out the window at a chain-link fence surrounding a huge complex of buildings. "That's the base entrance," he said, "where we'd line up for inspection every morning at 6. His voice carried this weird mix of fondness and pain, like remembering good times that were attached to bad ones. A few blocks later, he gestured at a dive bar with a neon sign that flickered even in daylight. "We used to go there every Friday night," he said. "The whole unit crammed into those back booths getting drunk and loud. Maya always won at pool even when she was wasted." I watched his face as he talked, and saw how every memory seemed to hurt and comfort him at the same time. He turned down a street that led toward the ocean and slowed the car near a public beach access point. "We'd come here on rare days off," he said. "Just sit in the sand and not talk about anything related to the military." Maya loved the water even though she grew up landlocked in Arizona. The nostalgia in his voice made my chest tight because I understood now that this whole city was a map of memories he couldn't escape, places that would always remind him of someone who wasn't here anymore. Maya's parents lived in a small house painted pale yellow with white trim, a tidy front yard, and an American flag hanging by the door. Before we even made it up the walkway, the front door opened and a woman rushed out. She was small and gray-haired, wearing jeans and a Marine Corps t-shirt that probably belonged to Maya. She grabbed my boyfriend in a hug that looked like it might break both of them, her arms wrapped tight around him while he bent down to hold her back. Maya's father appeared in the doorway, a tall man with a military bearing even in civilian clothes, and he waited until his wife released my boyfriend before stepping forward to clap him on the shoulder. "Good to see you, son," he said, and the way he said son made it clear this wasn't just politeness, but something earned through years of shared grief. They both turned to me then, and I felt their eyes studying my face, trying to figure out exactly who I was and what I meant to their daughter's friend. Maya's mother smiled and introduced herself, shaking my hand with both of hers, her grip warm and firm. Maya's father nodded at me and said they were glad I could make it, his voice careful and measured like he was still deciding what he thought about my presence here. Inside their home, I understood immediately why my boyfriend had been nervous about bringing me. Photos of Maya covered every available surface, arranged on shelves and walls and side tables, a complete visual history of her life from infancy to the last pictures taken before she died. Baby Maya in a bathtub, toddler Maya on a tricycle, teenage Maya at prom in a blue dress, Maya in her dress blues at boot camp graduation, Maya in combat gear somewhere overseas. The house wasn't just decorated with her memory, it was built around it, every room a shrine to the daughter they'd lost. I felt the weight of their grief pressing down on me from all sides, making it hard to breathe normally. We sat in the living room and Maya's mother brought out iced tea while her father asked about our drive from the airport. My boyfriend answered in short sentences, his posture stiff and formal like he was reporting to a superior officer. I could see him struggling with something, some internal battle between wanting to be here and wanting to run away from how much it hurt. Dinner was pot roast and potatoes, comfort food that Maya's mother said was her daughter's favorite meal. We sat around a small dining table with an empty chair that nobody mentioned but everyone noticed. Maya's father asked my boyfriend about his job, about our house, about whether he was taking care of himself. My boyfriend answered honestly but kept everything brief, like he felt guilty for having a life to report on when Maya didn't. I sensed the weight of survivor's guilt in every word he spoke, the way he downplayed his own happiness as if joy was something he didn't deserve. Maya's mother turned her attention to me and asked how we met, what I did for work, the normal getting-to-know-you questions that felt completely surreal given where we were and why. I answered carefully, aware that I was evaluated not just as his girlfriend, but as someone he trusted enough to bring into this sacred annual ritual they all shared. I told them about my job, about our house, about how patient and kind he'd been with me even when I didn't deserve it. Maya's mother nodded along, and I could see her mentally checking boxes, deciding if I was good enough for the man who visited her daughter's grave every year. After dinner, Maya's father pulled out a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses, gesturing for my boyfriend to follow him to the back porch. Through the kitchen window, I watched them sit in lawn chairs, their heads bent close together as they talked in voices too low for me to hear. 2 men bound by combat and loss, sharing something I'd never fully understand, no matter how many articles I read about military trauma or survivor's guilt. Their conversation looked heavy and important, the kind of talk that only happens between people who've seen the same darkness. Maya's mother and I cleaned up the kitchen together, loading the dishwasher and wiping down counters in comfortable silence. Then she said she was glad he finally brought someone with him, because she worried about him making this trip alone every year. Her kindness, despite her own devastating loss, made me feel physically sick about my accusations and suspicions, about how I'd turned his grief into evidence of betrayal. I apologized again for intruding on their family tradition, and she waved it off, saying that anyone he cared about enough to bring here was welcome in their home. We left around 9 and drove to our hotel in silence. He checked us in at the front desk while I stood beside him feeling exhausted from holding myself together for hours. In our room, he sat on the edge of the bed and started unlacing his shoes with shaking hands. I sat next to him and put my hand on his back, feeling the tension in his muscles. Then he broke. Deep, body-shaking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere primal and unreachable, a kind of crying I'd never witnessed from any person before. I wrapped my arms around him and held on while he fell apart, not trying to fix it or make it stop, finally understanding that some pain just needs to be felt and witnessed and survived. He cried for maybe 20 minutes, gasping for air between sobs, his whole body trembling against mine. When he could finally speak, he told me between ragged breaths that he felt guilty for being alive when Maya wasn't, guilty for finding happiness with me when she'd never have that chance. The survivor's guilt was so heavy and irrational and completely consuming, and I realized he'd been carrying this weight alone for 3 years, without letting anyone see how much it crushed him. He kept apologizing for crying, for bringing me here, for being a mess, and I kept telling him to stop apologizing for being human. Then he started talking about Maya in a way he never had before, explaining that she'd been struggling for months before she died. There were signs everyone missed or didn't take seriously enough, jokes about not wanting to be here anymore that people laughed off as dark humor. He blamed himself for not checking on her more, for not insisting she talk to someone, for not somehow preventing what felt inevitable in hindsight even though nobody could have known for sure. I told him everything. About the messages I found on my ex's phone that he swore were just work. About the way he made me feel crazy for months, saying I was paranoid and jealous when my gut knew something was wrong. I described coming home early one day and finding proof I couldn't deny anymore. The confrontation where he actually blamed me for pushing him into someone else's arms. My boyfriend listened without interrupting, his breathing steady in the darkness. When I finished, I told him I knew my past wasn't his fault, but it's why I saw betrayal in a text about beer instead of grief. It's why I accused him of cheating when he was just honoring someone he lost. He was quiet for a long time before he started talking about how he's been keeping parts of himself locked away because he didn't want to drag me into his darkness. He explained that he tells people he's fine when he's not, that he pretends the nightmares don't still wake him up sweating and disoriented. I admitted I've been searching for signs of betrayal in everything he does because expecting the worst feels safer than being blindsided again. We kept talking as the room grew lighter, neither of us sleeping, both of us finally saying things we'd been too scared to voice. He confessed he's been protecting me from his worst days by withdrawing instead of letting me see him struggle. I told him I've been testing his loyalty in small ways without realizing it, looking for cracks that would prove my fears right. When morning came, the heaviness was immediate. He moved through getting dressed like his body was on autopilot while his mind was somewhere else entirely. His face had gone blank in a way that scared me more than the crying, like he'd shut down every emotion to get through what came next. I got ready quietly, not sure what to say or if saying anything would help. We checked out of the hotel and drove to Maya's parents' house, where they were waiting on the front porch with flowers already in hand. The 4 of us got into their car, my boyfriend and I in the back seat with the cases of Buzz Light beer stacked between us. Nobody spoke during the 20-minute drive to the cemetery. The silence felt thick and suffocating, like the air itself was carrying the weight of what this day meant to all of them. I watched the scenery pass by the window, normal people doing normal things on a day that felt anything but normal. The military cemetery stretched out in every direction when we arrived, thousands of identical white headstones arranged in perfect rows across immaculate grass. We parked and walked through the grounds, following a path Maya's parents clearly knew by heart. The headstones blurred together until we stopped at one that looked exactly like all the others except for the name carved into it. Maya's full name, her rank, the dates that marked the beginning and end of her life. Her father knelt down and placed the flowers at the base of the headstone, while her mother set up a small framed photo of Maya in her uniform, smiling at whoever took the picture. My boyfriend stood completely still, staring at the grave with an expression of such raw pain that I had to look away to keep from crying. His jaw was clenched tight and his hands were fists at his sides, like he was physically holding himself together. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. Maya's father opened one of the beers and poured it slowly onto the grass in front of the headstone, the liquid soaking into the ground. Her mother opened another and did the same, a ritual that felt both simple and incredibly meaningful. My boyfriend took the third beer with shaking hands and poured it out, his lips moving silently like he was saying something only Maya could hear. They each took beers for themselves and stood there drinking in silence for a few minutes. The four of us gathered around a grave like we were including her in the moment. Then her father started talking about basic training, about how Maya convinced another recruit to help her prank their drill sergeant by hiding all his whistles. Everyone laughed softly through their tears as he described the sergeant's face when he couldn't find a single whistle anywhere. My boyfriend added that Maya almost got kicked out for that stunt but somehow charmed her way out of serious punishment, and I could hear the fondness in his voice mixed with the grief. More stories came after that, each one painting a clearer picture of who Maya had been. Her mother talked about Maya's attempts at cooking that were so bad everyone learned to eat before coming to her place. My boyfriend told a story about Maya winning a poker tournament on base and trash-talking guys twice her size. Her father described the time Maya won a push-up contest against the entire platoon, refusing to quit even when her arms were shaking. They passed around more beers and kept talking, sharing memories that made Maya feel alive and present and real, which somehow made her absence feel even more crushing. My boyfriend stepped closer to the headstone and dropped to one knee in the grass. His hand reached out and touched the carved letters of Maya's name, fingers tracing each one slowly like he was trying to connect with her through the stone. He started talking in a voice so quiet I could barely hear him at first. He told Maya about me, about how we met, about how scared he'd been to let someone in again after losing her. His voice cracked when he said he was sorry for taking 3 years to bring someone to meet her, sorry for being afraid she'd think he was replacing her or forgetting what she meant to him. He promised her parents he'd keep coming back every single year, that he wouldn't let her be forgotten no matter how much time passed or how his life changed. The raw pain in his voice made my chest hurt, so badly I had to press my hand against it just to breathe. Tears were streaming down his face, but he kept talking to her like she could hear him, like she was right there listening to everything he needed to say. He told her he missed her every day, and that the guilt of surviving when she didn't still woke him up at night sometimes. Watching him break down at her grave made me understand what he meant about carrying this every single day. This wasn't old grief that had healed over with time and distance. This was fresh and aching and right beneath the surface of everything he did, a constant companion he'd learned to function around but never truly escaped. He got up after a few minutes and just stood there staring at her name with tears running down his face, his jaw clenched tight like he was trying to hold himself together. Maya's mother moved closer to me and put her arm around my shoulders. She spoke quietly so only I could hear, telling me she was grateful he had me now, that Maya would want him to be happy and loved. The generosity of her words given her own loss hit me hard. Here was a woman who'd buried her daughter, who came to this cemetery every year to pour beer on her grave, and she was worried about whether her daughter's friend had someone to love him. I started crying for the first time since we'd arrived at the cemetery, tears falling so fast I couldn't stop them. She squeezed my shoulder and didn't say anything else, just stood there with me while we both watched my boyfriend grieve for the woman he couldn't save. We stayed at the graveside for over an hour, nobody wanting to be the first one to suggest leaving. The afternoon sun felt too bright and normal for how heavy everything felt, like the world should somehow acknowledge what we were carrying, but instead just kept going like any other day. People walked dogs on the paths between headstones and birds sang in the trees and cars drove past on the road outside the cemetery gates. Finally, Maya's father said we should probably head back to the house before it got too late. We walked to the car in complete silence, emotionally wrung out and exhausted in a way that went deeper than just being tired. My boyfriend held my hand so tight it almost hurt, but I didn't pull away because I could feel how much he needed the connection. Back at Maya's parents' house, we sat in their living room surrounded by photos of their daughter everywhere I looked. The walls were covered with pictures from every stage of her life, and the shelves held framed photos of her in uniform, with friends, at family gatherings. We shared more memories over sandwiches that Maya's mother had made, but nobody really ate. The conversation drifted between past and present, laughter and tears, following the natural rhythm of grief that doesn't follow any logical pattern. One minute, Maya's father was laughing about the time she convinced her entire unit to wear their uniforms backward for a group photo as a prank, and the next minute he was crying into his hands. My boyfriend told a story about Maya teaching herself guitar by watching videos online and how she'd play the same 3 chords over and over until everyone wanted to throw her guitar off the roof. Maya's mother laughed and said she still had that guitar in the closet, that she couldn't bring herself to get rid of it even though nobody played it anymore. Then Maya's father stood up and said he wanted to play something. He went to the closet and pulled out Maya's old guitar, the same one from all the stories. He sat back down and started playing a song, his voice rough but steady as he sang. My boyfriend closed his eyes listening, and I watched tears stream down his face that he didn't bother to wipe away. He was finally letting himself feel everything in front of people who understood, people who wouldn't judge him or tell him to move on, or ask why he wasn't over it yet. The song ended and nobody spoke for a while. As evening started to approach and the light through the windows turned golden, Maya's mother stood up and asked if she could talk to me privately. We went into the kitchen together and she turned to face me with tears in her eyes. She thanked me for coming, for supporting him through this, for being patient with his grief. She told me he'd been alone with this for too long and she was relieved he'd finally trusted someone enough to share it. She said she could see how much he loved me, and that gave her hope he might actually heal someday, instead of just surviving. I didn't know what to say, so I just hugged her and we both cried in her kitchen while the men sat in the living room with Maya's memory all around them. Before we left for our hotel, I surprised everyone by asking if I could have a moment at Maya's grave alone. They all looked at me with confused expressions, but agreed. My boyfriend drove me back to the cemetery and waited in the car while I walked to her headstone by myself. The sun was setting now, and the cemetery was almost empty. I stood in front of Maya's grave and felt awkward at first, talking to someone I'd never met. But then I started speaking out loud even though I never knew her. I apologized for my jealousy and suspicion, for turning her memory into something ugly in my mind. I promised to take care of him, and to never make him feel guilty for grieving her, to understand that loving me doesn't mean forgetting her, or moving on from his pain. I told her headstone that I almost destroyed something good because I couldn't see past my own trauma. I explained that my ex had cheated on me and destroyed my ability to trust anyone, and when I saw her name in that text message, I let all my old wounds take over. I was grateful for the chance to understand the truth instead of losing him over my assumptions. I promised to honor her memory by being worthy of the trust he'd placed in me, by doing my own healing work so my past doesn't poison our future. I stood there for a few more minutes just looking at her name carved in stone, thinking about how she'd never get to fall in love or buy a house or grow old. Then I walked back to the car where my boyfriend was waiting. He drove us back to the hotel in silence, and I watched the California streets pass by outside the window. The sun had set completely now, and streetlights made everything look orange and strange. When we got to the parking lot, he turned off the engine but didn't move to get out of the car. He just sat there with his hands still on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. I waited because I didn't know what to say after everything I'd just witnessed at the cemetery. Finally, he took a deep breath and opened his door. We walked across the parking lot to our room, and the whole time I could feel the weight of the day pressing down on both of us. Inside the hotel room, he sat on the edge of the bed and put his face in his hands. I sat down next to him and put my hand on his back. He leaned into me and wrapped his arms around my waist, holding me tight like I might disappear if he let go. He pulled back just enough to look at me, and his eyes were red and tired. He said he was grateful I came with him this year because he'd been making this trip alone for so long and it hurt every single time. He told me he'd been scared to let me see this side of him because most people don't know how to handle grief this big. They get uncomfortable, or they try to fix it, or they tell him he needs to move on already. He was afraid I'd think he was broken or too damaged to love properly. I told him I understood now why he couldn't just casually mention this over dinner. This wasn't something you bring up like talking about the weather or what you did last weekend. I said loving someone means seeing all of them, including the parts that hurt and the parts that are still healing. His grief didn't scare me anymore because I finally understood what it was and where it came from. We talked for hours that night about how we both needed to work on healing ourselves while also being there for each other. He admitted he goes to counseling through the VA, but he hasn't been totally honest with his therapist about how much he still struggles. He said he shows up to appointments and talks about surface-level stuff, but never really digs into the guilt he carries about surviving when Maya didn't. I asked him why he holds back in therapy, and he said it feels easier to just manage the pain than to actually work through it. I told him that wasn't fair to himself, and it wasn't really healing if he was just keeping everything locked down. He nodded and said he knew I was right, and he'd try to be more open in his next session. Then I took a breath and admitted I needed to find my own therapist to deal with my trust issues. I told him it wasn't fair to him or to me that I was still operating from a place of fear and suspicion because of what my ex did years ago. He said he supported that completely, and offered to help me find someone good. We made a promise to each other right there in that hotel room to be more honest about our triggers and our wounds. He said he'd share more about his hard days instead of withdrawing and shutting down. I promised to voice my anxieties when they came up instead of letting them spiral into accusations and paranoia. The next morning, we checked out of the hotel and drove to the airport. The flight home felt completely different from the flight there. We were both exhausted and didn't talk much, but there was something new between us now. We'd seen each other's deepest wounds and messiest parts, and we'd both chosen to stay. We'd chosen to work on healing together while also doing our own individual work. When we landed and drove back to our house, I felt like I was seeing everything with new eyes. I noticed things I'd walked past 100 times before but never really paid attention to. In his closet, there was a Marine Corps flag folded in a perfect triangle sitting on the top shelf. On his dresser was a challenge coin that I'd always thought was just some random keepsake. The way he organized his space with everything in its exact place wasn't just him being neat. It was military precision drilled into him from years of service. These weren't just quirks anymore, but pieces of an identity shaped by experiences I'd never fully understand. A few days after we got back, I was in the kitchen making coffee when his phone buzzed on the counter next to me. I felt that old familiar urge rise up in my chest to grab it and check who was texting him. My hand actually moved toward the phone before I caught myself and pulled it back. The fear and suspicion were still there, living inside me like they always had been. But now I had the awareness to recognize it as my trauma talking instead of truth. I stepped away from the counter and took a few deep breaths until the urge passed. That night, I sat at my laptop and started researching therapists who specialized in trust issues and past relationship trauma. I read through profiles and reviews for over an hour looking for someone who seemed like a good fit. I needed someone who wouldn't just tell me to get over it or that I was being unreasonable. I needed someone who understood that betrayal leaves actual scars that don't just fade because time passes. Making the appointment felt like taking responsibility for my own healing instead of expecting my boyfriend to fix damage someone else caused. My first session was 2 weeks later in a small office downtown. The therapist's name was Gage, and he had kind eyes and asked me to tell him why I was there. I started talking about my ex and the cheating, and suddenly I was crying harder than I'd cried in months. Talking about it brought up feelings I thought I'd dealt with years ago, but clearly I'd just buried them. Gage listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he helped me see that I'd been protecting myself by assuming betrayal before it could happen. I'd been staying alert and watching for signs of cheating so I'd never be blindsided again like I was with my ex. But that constant watching and suspicion was costing me the chance at real closeness with someone who actually deserved my trust. Around the same time I started my therapy work, my boyfriend made a change too. He started going to his VA counseling appointments every week instead of once a month like he'd been doing before. The first few times he came home afterward, he looked wiped out. His eyes were red and his shoulders sagged like he'd been carrying heavy boxes all day. He'd drop his keys on the counter and head straight to the bedroom without saying much. I'd follow him in and find him lying on the bed staring at the ceiling. When I asked if he wanted to talk about it, he'd shake his head and say he just needed to process everything. But after a few weeks of regular sessions, something shifted. He started telling me small pieces of what he discussed with his therapist. He'd mentioned that they talked about Maya and the guilt he carried about not seeing the signs before she died. He'd explained that his counselor was helping him understand that survivor's guilt was normal, but also something he needed to work through instead of just carrying forever. One night after a particularly hard session, he sat at our kitchen table with his head in his hands and told me it felt good to finally stop pretending he was fine. He said he'd been holding everything in for 3 years, acting like he'd moved on and processed it all, when really he'd just gotten better at hiding how much he still hurt. Hearing him admit that made me realize how much strength it took for him to show up to those appointments week after week and actually do the work instead of just going through the motions. Things felt like they were moving in a good direction for both of us until one evening about 6 weeks after California. He was supposed to be home from work at 6, but 7 o'clock came and went with no text or call. By 7:30, I was pacing the living room, checking my phone every 2 minutes. My chest felt tight and my hands were shaking as old fears crept back in. By 8 o'clock, I'd convinced myself something was wrong. He was avoiding me or lying about where he was, or maybe he'd decided this whole thing was too much work, and he was done. When he finally walked through the door at 8:15, I was sitting on the couch with my arms crossed and tears streaming down my face. He stopped in the doorway looking confused and asked what was wrong. I stood up and my voice came out harsh and accusing when I said he'd been gone for over 2 hours without any explanation. I told him it felt like he was avoiding me on purpose. He put his hands up and said he wasn't avoiding anyone, but his tone was defensive and sharp. He said he needed space sometimes and I couldn't expect him to report his every move. That made me angrier because it felt like he was twisting what I'd said. I shot back that asking for a simple text wasn't the same as demanding he report his every move. He raised his voice and said he didn't realize he needed permission to stay late at work. We were suddenly standing in our living room yelling at each other, both of us hurt and angry and falling right back into old patterns of miscommunication. But then something different happened. He stopped mid-sentence and took a deep breath. He walked over and sat down on the couch, and after a second, I sat down too. We were both quiet for a minute, both of us breathing hard and trying to calm down. He spoke first, and his voice was quieter when he said he was sorry for not calling. He explained that he'd gotten caught up in a project at work, and completely lost track of time. It wasn't that he was avoiding me or trying to stay away. He just genuinely forgot to check his phone or send a message. He said he understood why that made me anxious given everything we'd been through, but it wasn't intentional or meaningful beyond him being forgetful. I wiped my eyes and admitted I'd jumped to the worst conclusion without any real reason. I told him I felt insecure earlier that day for no particular reason, and when he was late, it triggered all my old fears about being lied to and cheated on. I said none of that was actually about him or anything he'd done wrong. It was about me and my past trauma making me assume betrayal when there wasn't any. We sat there and talked through what had just happened using things we were both learning in our therapy sessions. It was messy and uncomfortable, and neither of us felt great about how we'd handled it. But we worked through it together instead of shutting down or walking away or letting it turn into something bigger and more damaging. We both apologized again and talked about what we could do differently next time. He said he'd set a reminder on his phone to text me if he was going to be more than 30 minutes late. I said I'd try to pause before assuming the worst, and actually ask him what was going on instead of building a story in my head. When we finally went to bed that night, we both felt closer instead of more distant. The fight had been scary because it showed we could still fall into old patterns, but working through it showed we were both committed to doing things differently. The following weekend, Miranda drove up to visit. She showed up Saturday morning with coffee and bagels, and we sat at the kitchen table while I filled her in on everything. I told her about the California trip and meeting Maya's parents and visiting the grave. I explained how my boyfriend had broken down crying and shared things with me he'd never told anyone. I talked about starting therapy with Gage and how hard it was to dig into the betrayal from my ex. I mentioned the fight my boyfriend and I had about him being late, and how we'd managed to work through it instead of letting it explode. Miranda listened to everything, and when I finished, she said she was proud of me for doing the actual work, instead of just saying I would. But then she leaned forward and her expression got more serious. She said she was glad I was making progress, but she also wanted to make sure I wasn't letting myself off the hook too easily. She reminded me that understanding where my trust issues came from didn't mean I got a pass for how I'd acted. She pointed out that I'd violated my boyfriend's privacy by figuring out his password and reading his texts, and I'd accused him of something horrible based on one message I didn't understand. She said the fact that I had trauma from my ex didn't excuse those choices. It explained them, but it didn't make them okay. Hearing her say it so directly stung, but I knew she was right. I'd been so focused on the revelation about Maya and our emotional breakthrough that I hadn't fully reckoned with my own actions. I'd invaded his privacy and made terrible accusations based on my own fears, rather than any actual evidence. Miranda wasn't trying to make me feel bad. She was trying to make sure I took real responsibility, instead of just understanding why I did what I did. A few days after Miranda left, my boyfriend brought up the idea of me meeting Luca. He explained that Luca was one of his Marine buddies who'd also known Maya and struggled with similar survivor's guilt. Luca and his wife Beatrice lived about an hour away, and my boyfriend thought it might be good for all of us to get together. He said hearing Luca talk openly about his therapy and PTSD might make him feel less alone in his own struggles. We set up dinner at our place for the following Friday. When they arrived, Luca was tall and broad-shouldered with a quiet intensity about him. Beatrice was warm and friendly, hugging both of us like we were old friends even though we'd never met. We made pasta and sat around our small dining table, and the conversation started light with talk about jobs and the weather and normal getting-to-know-you stuff. But as dinner went on and we opened a second bottle of wine, the conversation shifted. Luca started talking about his therapy journey without any prompting, like it was just a normal topic of conversation. He mentioned his PTSD diagnosis and the medication he was on, and the weekly sessions with his counselor. He talked about nightmares and hypervigilance and how hard it was to feel safe even in his own home sometimes. My boyfriend listened intently, nodding along, and I could see his whole body relax as Luca spoke. When Luca mentioned the guilt he carried about Marines who didn't make it home, my boyfriend jumped in and said he felt the exact same way about Maya. The two of them talked back and forth about survivor's guilt and the irrational feeling that they should have been able to prevent deaths that weren't their fault or responsibility. Watching them share this openly made me realize how isolated my boyfriend must have felt, carrying all of this alone for so long. After dinner, Beatrice asked if I wanted to help her with dessert in the kitchen. Once we were alone, she turned to me and her expression became more serious. She told me that supporting a partner with combat trauma was hard work that required a lot of patience and clear boundaries. She was honest about the challenges in a way that felt both helpful and slightly scary. She talked about the nightmares Luca had where he'd wake up yelling or crying or not knowing where he was. She mentioned the times he'd withdraw emotionally and shut down for days, unable to talk about what he was feeling. She explained how anniversary reactions worked, how certain dates or sounds or smells could trigger him back to traumatic moments without warning. She said there were times she felt like she was walking on eggshells, trying to be supportive while also protecting her own mental health. But then her expression softened, and she said that despite all the challenges, the depth of connection possible when both people committed to healing was unlike anything she'd experienced in previous relationships. She told me that Luca's willingness to be vulnerable and do the therapy work had made their relationship stronger than it would have been without those struggles. She said the key was both of them doing their own individual work, while also supporting each other, maintaining boundaries so his trauma didn't become her trauma. Her honesty was refreshing and a little overwhelming, but it helped me understand what I might be signing up for long-term with my boyfriend. The next week in therapy, Gage and I worked through specific memories of my ex's betrayal. He had me describe the timeline of events leading up to discovering the cheating, and as I talked through it, I started to see patterns I hadn't noticed before. My ex had been distant and secretive for months before I found proof, but when I'd asked him about it, he'd made me feel crazy for being suspicious. He'd accused me of being paranoid and controlling, turning my legitimate concerns back on me until I doubted my own instincts. Gage helped me understand that my ex had been gaslighting me, making me question my own perception of reality so I wouldn't trust what I was seeing. That betrayal of my trust and my sense of reality had damaged me even more than the actual cheating. It explained why I'd been so quick to doubt myself with my current boyfriend, why I'd felt like I needed concrete proof before trusting my gut. But Gage also helped me see that my current boyfriend was nothing like my ex. When I'd confronted him about Maya, he hadn't tried to make me feel crazy or turn it back on me. He'd been sad and hurt, but he'd explained everything honestly. He'd shown me the photo and told me the truth even though it was painful to talk about. Gage gave me concrete tools to use when anxiety spiked, like pausing to ask myself what evidence I actually had before jumping to conclusions. He taught me to identify the physical sensations of anxiety in my body, so I could recognize when my trauma was triggered versus when I was responding to actual present danger. Having these specific techniques made me feel less helpless against my own fears. My boyfriend and I started doing weekly check-ins on Sunday evenings. We'd sit on the couch with tea and take turns sharing how we were doing emotionally, what we were struggling with, and what we needed from each other. The first few times felt awkward and forced, like we were reading from a script. But after a few weeks, it became a space I actually looked forward to. He'd tell me about hard moments at work, or things that came up in his VA counseling, and I'd share what I was working on with Gage, or times I'd felt anxious during the week. We'd talk about what we needed from each other, like him asking for space on certain evenings, or me asking for extra reassurance when I was feeling insecure. The check-ins helped us address small issues before they became big problems, and they created a regular space for vulnerability that didn't require a crisis to happen first. It felt like we were building new patterns of communication that were healthier than anything either of us had experienced in past relationships. Then during a session with Gage about 2 months into therapy, I had a breakthrough that shifted something fundamental in how I saw myself. We were talking about my ex's cheating again, and Gage asked me why I thought he'd done it. I started to give my usual answer about not being enough or not meeting his needs, but Gage stopped me. He asked me to think about it differently. He said my ex had made a choice to cheat, and that choice reflected his character and values, not my worth as a partner. He pointed out that plenty of people have unmet needs in relationships, and they don't cheat. They communicate or go to therapy or end the relationship honestly. My ex had chosen deception and betrayal because that's who he was, not because I was insufficient or unlovable. Hearing Gage say it so plainly made something click in my brain. I'd been carrying this belief for years that I needed to be perfect and hypervigilant to prevent future betrayal. Like if I could just be enough and watch carefully enough, I could control whether someone cheated on me. But that belief gave my ex's choices power over my entire sense of self. It made his betrayal about my inadequacy instead of his character. Realizing that his cheating wasn't about me being insufficient or unlovable started to loosen the grip of the fear that had been controlling me. I couldn't prevent betrayal by being perfect or watching carefully. I could only choose partners with integrity and trust myself to recognize red flags. And my current boyfriend had shown me over and over that he had integrity, even when it was hard, even when the truth was painful to share. A few weeks after that conversation with Gage about my ex's choices, I'm sitting in our living room when my boyfriend's phone buzzes on the coffee table. The screen lights up with a text from someone named Derek. I glance at it without thinking, then realize I don't feel the usual spike of anxiety. My hands don't reach for the phone. My mind doesn't start spinning worst-case scenarios about who Derek might be or what the message could mean. I just sit there, staring at the phone until the screen goes dark again, and notice the absence of that familiar panic. The compulsion that used to control me is just gone, like a switch flipped somewhere in my brain. When my boyfriend comes back from the kitchen with 2 mugs of tea, I tell him his phone went off. He picks it up, reads the message, and mentions casually that Derek wants to grab lunch next week. I nod and take my tea, feeling this quiet victory settle in my chest. The therapy work is actually changing something fundamental in how I respond to triggers. I'm not just managing my anxiety better. I'm becoming someone who doesn't automatically assume betrayal when a phone buzzes. That weekend, we're sitting at the kitchen table with our laptops, looking at flights for next year's California trip. He scrolls through dates and prices while I pretend to work on emails, but really I'm just watching him. His face is relaxed in a way it never is when he talks about Maya or the anniversary. He finds a good fare and adds it to his cart, then looks up at me with this expression I can't quite read. He asks if I'd be comfortable staying with Maya's parents instead of getting a hotel this time. The question catches me off guard. I know what he's really asking. He wants to bring me deeper into this tradition, to make me part of the annual ritual instead of just an observer. Maya's parents have their own guest room and they've mentioned it before, but he's always declined. Now he's ready to say yes, which means he's ready to integrate me fully into this piece of his life that used to be separate. I tell him I'd love that, and I mean it. The fact that he's making space for me in the painful parts, not just the easy ones, feels like something important shifting between us. He reaches across the table and squeezes my hand, then goes back to booking the flights like it's no big deal, but I can see the relief in his shoulders. A few days later, he comes home from his VA counseling session and sits down on the couch next to me. He's quiet for a minute, staring at his hands. Then he tells me his therapist said something that's been rattling around in his head all afternoon. She helped him see that honoring Maya's memory doesn't require him to stay frozen in grief. That Maya would want him to heal and be happy, not spend the rest of his life carrying guilt like a weight he can never put down. He says it out loud like he's testing the words, seeing if they feel true. He's starting to forgive himself for surviving when she didn't, recognizing that his guilt doesn't actually honor her or help anyone. It just keeps him stuck in the worst moment of his life, reliving it every day. I watch his face as he talks and see something different there. Not the absence of pain, but maybe the beginning of acceptance that the pain doesn't have to define everything. He tells me he's been so afraid of moving forward because it felt like forgetting her, like her death would matter less if he stopped hurting so much. But his therapist asked him what Maya would say if she could see him now, and he knows she'd tell him to stop punishing himself. She'd want him to live, not just exist. That night after he falls asleep, I sit at the kitchen table with a blank piece of paper and start writing a letter to my ex. I pour out everything I've been carrying for years. The anger at his lies and betrayal, the hurt of being made to feel like I wasn't enough, the damage he did to my ability to trust anyone after him. I write about how he gaslit me when I questioned him, made me feel crazy for my suspicions even though my instincts were right. I tell him about the years I spent assuming every man would eventually do what he did, how his choices poisoned every relationship I tried to have after him. The words come out messy and raw, my handwriting getting harder to read as emotions take over. I fill 3 pages front and back, not editing or censoring, just letting it all spill onto the paper. When I finally finish, my hand is cramping and my face is wet with tears I didn't realize I was crying. I read through what I wrote once, then take the pages outside to the fire pit in our backyard. I light them with a match and watch the paper curl and blacken, the words disappearing into ash and smoke. The flames eat through my anger and hurt, destroying the power I've been giving him for so long. It feels like releasing something I've been holding too tight for too long. When the last piece burns away, I go back inside and wash my face, feeling lighter than I have in years. 6 months after the California trip, we're both in different places than we were. He's managing his PTSD with regular therapy and medication that actually helps with the nightmares and anxiety. I'm rebuilding my ability to trust through consistent work with Gage, learning to recognize when my past trauma is talking versus when something is actually wrong. We still have hard days where his grief hits him out of nowhere, or my insecurities flare up over nothing. We still have triggers that catch us off guard, moments where we slip back into old patterns of shutting down or assuming the worst. But now we face those moments together with honesty and compassion, instead of fear and suspicion. When he has a bad night, he tells me instead of withdrawing. When I feel anxious about something, I voice it instead of letting it spiral into accusations. We're building something real on a foundation of shared vulnerability and mutual healing, both of us doing our individual work while also supporting each other. It's not perfect or easy, but it's honest. And after everything we've been through, honest feels like more than enough. All right, that's all I've got today. Thanks for letting me share this little moment with you. I hope it sits with you in a good way.